Okay. And we are on YouTube, and I am posting on land acknowledgement with some interesting links. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and good morning to you, Deputy Mayor Bailão. Thank you very much for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
Good. Good morning. Great.
Good. Thank you for finding the time. I'm sure it's very busy, so close to the end of your term.
A lot of packing.
I can imagine. So let's get right into it. We're here to talk about missing middle, affordable housing, the provincial housing affordability task force, the upcoming election. So we have very interesting topics to cover. So I want to start 4 years ago in the previous elections, where missing middle was not a hot topic as it is today. Definitely no policy or no action has been taken. And you are one of the most, when I learned about the missing middle, I think I heard about it from you and your, social media channels. What are you the most proud of in the change that you have seen in the last 4 years?
Well, it's interesting because just before the last election, the 2018 election, I actually co-chaired a working group with the Canadian Urban Institute and the Land Institute on missing middle. So we actually brought a whole bunch of people from nonprofit housing to development sector to city builders to talk about the missing middle. So we actually started this conversation just before the last election. And but you're right. I mean, it wasn't even in the radar. So there's a few things that I'm proud. I am proud of the dialogue that is happening, how people are getting engaged, getting involved, talking about issues. I've been stopped in the subway of people wanting to talk about this and saying, how do I support? How do I get involved? Because it's something that people are feeling, especially the younger generations, right? They're getting pushed out of the neighborhoods where they've grew up and they can't live where they would love to live. And so they are very passionate about that. So I feel proud about that. I also feel proud. We had in the last term, we had approved laneway housing, and that's what led us to say, okay, laneway housing is done. We put our toe in the water, so let's keep going. So it was kind of the first step. And so we had that working group on the missing middle. And so I feel proud of the lessons that we learned on the laneway housing. And one of them is that we really need to create this movement if we really want this policy to change. The only way that we were able to get laneway housing approved at City Hall is because we had so many civic organizations from the outside really pushing forward. So I think this is a movement that needs to be created inside City Hall. And obviously, and you just mentioned the municipal elections, we are in election mode. It is important to elect people that believe in this, but it is really important that we have these conversations. I'm looking forward to continue to have these conversations, because especially when you're out of politics, I'm really looking forward now to join the conversation with a different lens and in a different capacity. So I'm proud of that. I'm also proud of the work that we started with the EHON project, right? The enhancing housing opportunities in neighborhoods. So there's been, work being done in getting retail in our neighborhoods. We're looking into, there's a draft OP that is out there for consultations on allowing multiplexes. We really also want to look into our main streets. And when we talk about main streets, some of them are not, the bigger, larger avenues, but, streets that are well served by transit that should be really having a lot more density than what we have. So I'm proud of that work, recognizing that there's a lot of work to be done and we need to move fast, because it's a crisis out there, right? It's a housing crisis, it's a climate crisis, it's a mobility crisis in our city. I mean, God knows we want to get around. So all these issues, the missing middle addresses in some aspects of it. So
absolutely. Okay, so that was looking back 4 years. Now I want to take you, imagine this is 2026. We're about to have another elections coming up. how, you mentioned Eon, for me, it all falls under the missing middle. So everything that is within the stable neighborhoods, whatever that means. What success will look like? Give us some goals as the industry. What success will look like?
I think looking back, I would consider success to have a lot more zoning as of right in our main avenues. So a lot of more upzoning needs to happen, and to have housing choices in our neighborhoods. So the single family home is an option, but it's not the only option in our neighborhoods. So I think it is important that we put it that way, because a lot of people, the people that are a little bit concerned about this thing, they say, oh my God, are you going to take away my home? Nobody's going to force anybody to give up their home, but it's about giving options to people. And I think that is important. And if people want to continue to live in their single family home, they'll have that opportunity. But at least if other families that might not have the same financial needs, might not want it even, they have the option to still live in that neighborhood, to be included in that neighborhood, without being forced into living into a 4-bedroom single family home.
Absolutely. And you mentioned options. For so many of us, single family home is not even an option. And yes, that's I always say, for especially as someone who moved to Canada, single family home is not top priority. Believe it or not, people, but it's not always the dream. And you mentioned, I was on a panel with you on Jane's Walk, and you mentioned a sentence that I really remember vividly. You said, we're not going to build our way out of this crisis. So give me some hope. What do you think needs to happen? And if you think that, wouldn't you say that building more, and I always say we are building a lot, but maybe not necessarily the units we need to reflect our diversity. If we're not going to build our way out of this crisis, what are we going to do?
You're right. I use that all the time. I usually say we're not going to build our way out of this crisis, and we're not going to fund our way out of this crisis. Because what I find a little bit frustrating is these camps that just focus on these ideologies that it's like, oh no, the market will take care of itself. We just build, and it will solve all the housing issues. And then the other side is like, no. Just get the private sector out of the way. We just get government to build, fund everything through government, and the crisis will be over. The reality is governments don't have enough money to do that. Private sector will never create the housing on the lower side of the spectrum that we need. Housing is a spectrum. When we look about housing, you look about the needs from everybody that is living on social housing. The average salary of an individual in our TCHC is $16,000 a year. The market is never going to create housing for somebody that lives on $16,000 a year. We live in a state that, fortunately, we have, social services that help support people like that, and to give them an opportunity and a chance to have a healthy life like that. And we need to continue to do that. So we need to have the resources that governments have in terms of funds to create the housing in that side of the spectrum, and allow and create legislation to have the supply side taking care of the higher end of the spectrum. I mean, who would have imagined 30 years ago that, a nurse would be saying, I can't live in Toronto because I cannot afford in Toronto, right? But that's what we're living today. We're starting to think about how do we create affordability for somebody that makes $70,000 a year. And that you can have an impact with legislation. You can have an impact with supply. You get that side of the spectrum. So we need both. We need both of these actions. We need government funding to make sure that we create the supportive housing, the social housing, the deep affordable, but we need supply. And so it's really frustrating sometimes when we're at community meetings and people say, well, these are all luxury condos and they're not even affordable housing. Well, there's a level of affordability, right? Affordability is very subjective, because if I can't afford, I might make, $50,000, but if I can't afford it, it might not be affordable for the person that is making 16, but it might be just affordable enough for me. And so we need to see this as a spectrum and see how the tools that we have where they'll be more effective. And so the government funding really needs to tackle the lower end and things like we're talking about, the missing middle, the supply. When you're talking about building faster, which to be honest with you also affects the lower, because if you speak to some of the nonprofits that build the deeply affordable housing, sometimes they have the same exact challenges that somebody that is developing, units that are for incomes of 80,000, right? Slow pace of approvals, the fact that the angular planes that cut the number of units and make the build form not as effective and not as operational efficient. So all these challenges also affect the lower side of the spectrum, but we do understand that the supply does have an impact on the lower. And I use this example all the time. You probably heard me saying this. When we had when the pandemic hit, within a few months, I think it was something like 2 or 3 months, rents dropped $500 in downtown Toronto. Why was that? Because we had the supply. The supply came on. People went back to their homes. International students went back home. Short-term rentals went back. So the supply was there. It had an impact on the rent. So supply, it has an impact. It has an impact on the price of housing. And so it is important that we have that in mind, understanding that supply will only bring it to a certain level, because cost of construction is very high. We all know it went up 20, 30%. There's not enough labor. So this housing issue also has other components to it, other things that are impacting all this equation, right?
Okay, you mentioned some really interesting points, so I want to talk about it, because we said that missing middle housing will increase supply, increase choices, and that hopefully will bring affordability. Can you speak to how, from your perspective in City Council, what else has been done, what else can be done in order to achieve affordability and sustainability, which is something that you talked about also, the sustainability and mobility, that it's, for me, the use of the car and sustainability is almost like saying the same thing. Because these two, affordability and sustainability, are factors that are identified as crucial in housing, and it's something that you talk a lot about. So how are we going to, and as an architect working in this industry, many of those are found to be just not feasible from day one. So we're talking about, the triplex and the fourplex so what else in terms of achieving this greater affordability? And one thing that comes to mind is that the city, the development charges on fourplex, the city redeemed. So this is one thing, but looking into the future, knowing that so many of those projects are, because of construction costs, probably is found to be unfeasible. What else can be done on that affordability piece?
So you're absolutely right. I think the one thing that I feel very proud that we've done during our last council meeting was to waive development charges for 4 units up to 4 units in a multiplex, and obviously that decreases the costs of constructing those apartments, and in areas, because most of these are actually being built in neighborhoods that are having population decrease. So we usually say that development charges are to pay for the growth, but in reality, a lot of these apartments are being built in neighborhoods where there's been a population decrease. So we know that they can be built a lot quicker than a big tower. We know that we want this kind of development. So that was the reason that we wanted to make sure that we reduce the cost as much as possible. We incentivize this kind of development, and we bring the population back to the levels that they were, or have some of the growth that the city is having in those neighborhoods. In the laneway and coach housing, what we have as well is an affordable housing program where we actually give a grant. And we provide $50,000 to assist with the construction of the costs, and it can even become a forgivable grant if the property is maintained in the same ownership. So again, the rent gets controlled, gets to be put at an affordable rate. And we basically partner with the homeowner to create that affordability. I think that is really important. I think what we have to do more is the economics of these things. Like I'm starting to see people coming and they're saying, you know what, if I do 6 units or 7 units, I can have one as affordable. I can get CMHC financing, and then I can have one as affordable unit because the math works. And that, as we are developing these policies, I think it is really important that we are practical. We understand the markets and the economics if we want it to translate into real units. You know, there's a lot of people that I've met in politics. I call them the feel-good policies. They love to create policy that feels great. It's like, oh, we're going to do, 50% affordable housing. And then it translates in nothing because it's not realistic. And so if we really want to create a policy that is realistic over these next 4 years, and as we develop these policies around the missing middle, it is really important that we look at the economics of how this is being done, and that we use our own financial tools to be aligned with our policy tools. So that's why we did what we did with the development charges, because for me, it was about aligning our financial tools with the policy and directing the policies and nudging what we want to happen as the city grows. And I think that as we move forward, it's going to be really, really important. And work with other orders of government. I think for the missing middle is going to be really important to work with CMHC and the banks. And I think we really need to bring the banks along, because the financing, how they will finance, how they understand this deal, how we ask them, like, guys, like, work with us to create products that makes it easy. The same way that we have to create an easy process, as of right process, it is really important that banks understand what we're trying to do and help us out so that a homeowner can go to the bank and get this thing financed. It's going to be crucial. These are all components that are really important.
Music to my ears, and people are writing amen in the chat. Many of my planner friends in municipalities admit that they've never seen a pro forma in their lives, right? So
I was shocked to learn that it's not a mandatory course in planning. I just learned recently it's not mandatory. So there's another thing that we should be advocating for.
For sure. Not just in planning school. I think also, sharing it on community, letting them know how hard it is to really make it work. It's not a coincidence, or a branding shtick to say that it's really hard to make those development or new housing work. 2022, beginning of 2022, before the provincial elections, there's an affordability task force that, me as a professional in the industry read it, and we all agreed there's nothing new in this report. They didn't reinvent anything, and yet a lot of it seemed innovative because they just, took things that for us seem so reasonable and so, almost for granted, and say, this is what needs to happen, exclusionary zoning, all of these things. And then in April 14, Bill 109 took fairly little out of it. What did you think? What did you think of the report? What did you think of, the Bill 109 in the context of the provincial election? Did we miss anything? What do you think?
Well, I think Bill 109 missed a few things, a number of things. And unfortunately, some of the things that I think they're trying to do are not going to get the results that they want. So, for example, some of the timings that they've and the penalties that they're giving municipalities, I am really concerned that is actually going to result in more backlog because I think that municipalities, once they get pushed against the wall, and if they have to give an answer to an application, because otherwise they're going to have to give back the fees, and the timing is so unrealistic that basically they're just going to say, okay, this is a no. And then we end up at the board and it's going to take forever to do. So I think it's going to complicate the process, that those timings were not realistic. I mean, I've spoken to people in the industry on the other side, and everybody agrees that there's no way you can get things turned around, because the process is a two-way street, right? And there is a lot of shortage of, professionals. The same way that, you hear municipalities saying we don't have enough planners, we don't have enough engineers. The developers are also saying, you know what, we're having a hard time because everybody's really busy. Now, we all know that the market is going through a really crazy time that we're all, holding our breath to see what this really is. And I'm wondering if it's starting to have impacts and things like that. But the reality is the timing is not realistic. So I think they did miss that. I think for people that were excited about the task force, we really thought that the exclusionary zoning was going to be somehow included. I think everybody is a bit disappointed that it hasn't come forward. And you know what, it could be done by still giving the opportunity for municipalities to fine tune it and adapt it and work with the communities on that. But I think that a signal and a mandate to the municipalities to deal with it would have been really important. And I hope that they still move into that direction. I know that we in Toronto are looking into these issues, but it needs to be done in a region at a regional level, taking into consideration the differences that we all have. Yes, cities are different, but I really think, especially in Toronto, we talk about the built form, right? I honestly think this is so much deeper, and it's going to have such a greater impact than just the built form in the city. I think this is really going to impact the soul of our city, because when you have neighborhoods that so many can't access, it's going to change the kind of the city and the kind of people that are going to grow up in the city. And this social inclusion that we have and social health that we have, I think is in jeopardy if we continue going down this path.
100%. And you're talking to someone who, left her home country because I couldn't see a future for myself. So I know it sounds like a joke, but 9 years ago, Toronto was my affordable option. Since then, I, watch it become less and less affordable. But you lose the talent, you lose the blood and oxygen of the city. Once people can see a future for themselves, they leave. Speaking of that, the city used a tool called MZO, a Ministry Zoning Order, that in Bill 109 got a tweak called Community Infrastructure Housing Accelerator. But same thing, gives a lot of power to the minister to create affordable housing. And you had some interesting case studies in your ward. What did you learn from providing I'm now talking about the deeply affordable. Okay, so the one you had, oh my God, I think Dover Court was the one.
321 Dover Court.
But you have more than one site. Disclaimer: I work on one of these sites. So, what were the challenges of providing truly and deeply affordable housing in your ward, where you're the councillor and you hear people fear that change? What did you learn? What can you teach us moving forward to our next affordable housing project?
That this is a constant conversation, and you should never expect it to be easy and accepted. I have to be honest with you, I was a bit taken back by the opposition in my own community. We and I think we still are, even after all that we are extremely welcoming, supportive community and caring community. And but through that process, I think I could really sense the fear and people not understanding what was happening in there, and that in some cases, not a lot, but some cases, reluctance even to learn. So there were some very difficult conversations. I can tell you that today the project is so well integrated in the community, like so many supportive housing, people thought that we were doing something totally new. And I was trying to tell them, like, supportive housing is not new. You have it down the street, up the street. It's all over in our communities. It's well integrated. What is new here is the construction method that we're using. And that was not even the issue. Nobody really cared about the construction method, but it was about the people that were going to live in the building. And thankfully, it's working really well. I've been there a couple of times, and it is heartwarming to see the impact that it has had on the tenants' lives, and it's life changing. And so it's but it was difficult. And one thing that I've learned is always go with a listening mind. Try to understand what the fear is. Try to respond and put the facts. Try to tune down a bit the emotion, but at the same time stand up for what you think is right. I think we've been doing that in the city, in all these projects. All these conversations have been tough, and so there's been difficult conversations, but I think that all my colleagues and the mayor have really done excellent work in all these communities where we've been building these modular housing. We are creating by the end of this year over 3,000 spaces that have supportive housing in the last couple of years. That's unprecedented between modular acquisitions that we've done, renovations, projects. It's a high number, and so there's been a lot of heavy lifting, and I actually feel proud of all the councillors that have been involved, and the mayor.
I want to get to 2 or 3 questions from the audience before we wrap up. By the way, the person who's asking about the 16 or 17 priority affordable housing sites, I'm assuming this you meant citywide, and not in your ward. But so I actually encourage you to check out Housing Now site. They have very detailed information that is very interesting. And we had a webinar with Salima Raji, VP Development of Creatio. So I encourage you, I don't know who this person is, but I encourage you to check out on our YouTube channel. Interesting question here from the audience. That's a very wise question. How do you see the diverse stakeholder groups being aligned, or I would say even how, from as a counselor, how do you do that? How do you bring everyone and get them involved, get them excited maybe about a certain opportunity? I'm curious to hear about it from your perspective.
You know what? I always try to be honest and straightforward and say, yes, this is going to create some challenges or not, or these are what we have in front of us. Also, I always try to look for what's common in people. Because a lot of people come to these meetings, and when you start looking at the values of what do you like in our community? All people like that, people from all walks of life can come and live in this community, and they can work in the community, and the working class that lives here. And so when you start doing that and saying, okay, so if we want to continue to have that, if that is what is important for our community, if that is what is important for our city, that is what we want to keep. So we need to change certain things. In order for things to stay the same, things need to change. So I always say, okay, what do we want to say? What are our common values that we need to work? And these are the facts. And I try to bring, as a politician, sometimes it's hard to have these conversations because people, they're skeptical. So I try to bring, other organizations, and we're very fortunate to have, people like the volunteers at Housing Now, and they do incredible work. I've had them come to my community, try to explain the math a little bit more, and say these are the facts. And so if we want to have all these things, we're going to have a bit more density. We're going to have. It doesn't mean that we have to say yes to everything. There are bad projects out there, even for somebody that that believes that we need to intensify, and there are bad projects, and there are things that don't fit in certain spaces. So, but it is understanding that, and it is understanding that this is it's not a one conversation. You're not going to change people's minds in one conversation. You're going to change people's minds over time. But when you start bringing it to their values and to their personal, how it impacts their lives, how you bring the stories of their neighbors, that's when I find that it really touches people. That's when people see it, oh my God, you know, that person now has their in-laws living in a laneway suite and taking care of their kids. Or, you know, when you bring it to the people, how it affects people's lives, that's how I found people relate more to these issues when they can see it in practice.
We try to keep our webinars to 30 minutes to respect your busy day and our audience. That was a fascinating conversation, and I want to wish you to wake up on October 25th with you know, some time. And although I have a feeling that you know, we'll hear about you, and you won't rest and have a too long of a vacation. And
but a little one, a little
yeah, exactly. That's what I said. October 25th. October 25th will be your moment. And then, because we need more people like you, and I would like to thank you on behalf of the housing industry for having someone like you, such a champion. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bailão. Have a wonderful day. See you next time.
Thank you.